Okay, I'd like to call the Rules and City Government Committee to order. For the record, I'd like to call the Rules and City Government Committee to order. Nothing like an echo of my own voice on my TV. For the record, Alderman Savage and Alderman Arnett are present. I'm not sure if there's any other aldermen in attendance. I don't see anyone else at all other than Ms. Green and Mr. Jakes. Okay, first item is approval of the agenda. And the agenda is a continuation of what we didn't get to at last week's meeting. Alderman Arnett?
Move approval of the agenda.
I will second that motion.
Okay. It's been moved and properly seconded.
Madam Chair, may I note for the record that there are several people, I see Terry Lomax, Phil Dales, and Ellen Fogarty that are tuning in. I don't know what their status is as far as the meeting, but they are here.
I just looked and they weren't here when I made my comment. So we do have some.
Oof.
Oh, okay. So they're out of the waiting room. So Ms. Fogarty, Mr. Dales, Mr. Lomax, I think that's it that I can see so far. So I assume they all would like to speak on R46. But right now we're approving the agenda, so it's premature to. Okay, so it's been moved that we approve the agenda as written. If I don't hear any amendments to the agenda, so I'll call the vote. All in favor of approving the agenda as written, please say aye.
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 Okay. Next is approval of the minutes for the October 6th meeting.
Move approval of the minutes for the October 6th meeting.
Second.
Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes as written, please say aye.
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 Okay. So first legislative item is continuation of R4620. Alderman Arnett, are you ready to address this with your amendments, and do we have them?
I am ready, and you should have them, though I will admit that they are a moving target. I sent you the basic amendments back on the 9th via email, and there has been conversation, particularly between Ms. Fogarty and I, even earlier today. So there is a newest set, which is my amendments 1 through 8. And then Alderman Savage has amendments, his own amendments 1 and 2.
I don't see your amendments attached. I just got the new agenda.
Mine or Ross's?
I'm talking to Ross right now. I see Savage, if you look at the agenda, the Savage amendments 1 and 2 are attached. There are no other amendments.
No, his aren't attached. They were just sent to Jacqueline prior to this meeting starting.
So
okay, then did you send them to all of us, Alderman?
I did.
Okay, so I need to go back into the minutes or into my emails and find this?
I just resent them to you. So if you just look for the email I sent you, it'll be the quicker one.
Ms. Green, are you talking about the, not the agenda that you just sent? You sent them separately from, oh, I see them. They just came in.
Okay.
Alderman Arnett, did you say 1 through 6?
1 through 8. It was 1 through 6 until Eileen and I talked earlier today.
The one that was just sent to us is 1 through 6. Okay, I'm having to cut and paste this so that I can have a copy of it in front of me.
Give me 1 second. I'll send you the version I sent to Jacqueline.
I've already done it.
Oh, okay.
It's printing out right now.
Okay.
Alderman Savage, your two amendments are the same, correct?
No.
No.
No?
Good.
No, they're not. What do you mean that they're the same?
Are they the same ones that are attached to the legislation?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I thought you meant they were the same thing. I was reading to make sure.
You mean the same thing as Alderman Arnett's?
Yeah, I just thought I made a mistake, but it's okay.
Okay, so, all right, Alderman Arnett?
Yes. So
you want to begin?
Amendment 1, first of all, Madam Chair, thank you for giving me the opportunity to come back and be more clear with these amendments. I think you were correct in postponing this discussion until this meeting, and it gave me more time to think this through. The first amendment is on page 3, line 2, and it changes the number of members from 12 to 17. And that will make sense as we get into amendment number 2.
May I ask, I'm looking at page 3 and it outlines specifically who the 12 members were to be appointed. Do you have a similar list or is that somewhere else?
It is. I have amendments 2 and 3 speak to the composition.
Okay, so your amendment line 2, page 3.
Is to increase the number of representatives from the maritime property owners from 2 to 4.
Okay, from 12 to 17 is what I'm looking at.
Well, that's amendment number 1.
Well, that's where I am.
Okay. Amendment number 1.
Because that's my question. That is my question.
Yes.
Because on page 3, number 1 has a number of subsets. So my question is, your amendment is changing the number 12 to 17.
Correct.
Does it also change that composition that's listed?
Not or amendment 1, no.
Or let me finish my question. Does that remain the same?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Amendment number 1 is simply referring to line 2, which changed the composition from 12 members to 17 members. Amendments 2 and 3 get into your question about changing the composition, and the answer to that question is yes.
So, Amendment 1 only changes line 2. Has
Correct.
No impact on the composition. Future amendments will address those changes.
Well, the future amendments are the ones that make the number go from 12 to 17.
Okay, yes, same thing. That's what I was trying to gather. Okay. Right. So do you want to take these collectively because they're all related to 1?
Well, certainly 1, 2, and 3 are related to 1, yes.
Okay.
So collectively, the Second Amendment on line 11 changes the representation from for the maritime property owners from 2 to 4. And that's consistent with what we were discussing at our last meeting.
Okay.
And then on page 3, after line 16, inserting 3 new members, a member from the Maritime Trade Association, a representative of the Annapolis Maritime Museum, and a representative from a Maritime Environmental Group. Those are made at the suggestion of the Planning and Zoning Department, and I subscribe to those changes. So that would be the composition of the task force is the 17 members with these 2 amendments, Amendment 2 and Amendment 3.
Okay. Any questions? I'd entertain a motion to recommend approval of amendments 1, 2, and 3 of the Arnett amendments.
So move.
Second.
Okay, further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of amendments 1, 2, and 3, please say aye.
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 Okay, thank you. Alderman, Amendment 4.
Amendment 4 is also on page 3, and it's lines 28 and 29, and it is a housekeeping. That part of the resolution was housekeeping, and in talking with Planning and Zoning, and particularly Eileen, she's asked that we strike that in order to give her and the Planning and Zoning more flexibility. The task force shall elect from amongst their appointed members a vice chair, chair, vice chair, and secretary. The argument is let the task force decide how they're going to do that. And I'm comfortable with that. So I'm offering that as amendment number 4.
I'll move amendment 4. Or are we doing this as a group?
Well, I think they're different.
I think you moved it. Alderman Arnett moved it. You seconding it, Rob?
Yes.
Alderman Savage?
Yep.
Okay. I do have a question. Does that mean there will not be a chair, vice chair, and a secretary, or does it mean that those positions, the folks in those positions will be appointed by staff and Ms. Fogarty? What does it mean for how that selection is made?
Eileen, you're on mute.
Ms. Fogarty, would you like to answer? You're on mute.
You're on mute, Eileen.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. These subgroups, or we call them working teams, will be doing a lot of work. And so actual work in lieu of bringing on other outside consultants. So what was done with the City Dock and what we did with the reopening and recovery task force is we would approach people that we thought could take on that task and often identify co-chairs for each of those groups. So we would look to do the same thing here. But we will be talking with them to make sure that they are able to take on the task, because there will be work for each of those subcommittees.
Well, right now we're talking about the chairmanship, the vice chairmanship, and the secretary. How do you envision those people being selected?
That will be the same process where we're going to see who can, because there'll be quite a bit of work on the city council, on the City Dock. I served as chair on this. We will talk with a couple of different people to see who will have the time to serve as probably a co-chair, because there's going to be work involved in that.
Madam Chair, if I could interject.
Yes, please.
I'm trying to balance my particular goals for this task force with the goals of planning and zoning, being the staffing this. And so I'm trying to reach a place where we can get the overall objectives of the task force accomplished for the purposes of the council and our legislative, with the ease of the planning and zoning staff to make this work at the ground level. This is standard language that's in almost all of the committees and groups that we established, but planning and zoning asks that we remove this. I'm comfortable with doing that. I think the task force will figure out their leadership as a natural part of it, but I'm offering this after consultation with Eileen, and turn it over to the committee for your wisdom on it.
Well, I just want to be clear on what this means. And from what I just heard Ms. Fogarty say, she's going to be the chair, and a vice chair will come out of those who have been appointed. Did I misunderstand?
So we will do one of two things after the mayor appoints the task force. Either we will appoint 2 co-chairs or 1 co-chair. And what we'll have to do is talk to several people to see who is able to take on that work.
Okay, you're speaking of the co-chairs, but what about the chairmanship, or is there a chair?
There'll be what there'll be probably is 2 co-chairs.
Okay.
So that's where the flexibility comes in, Madam Chair. For me, the primary objective is let's get this task force up and working. I think that we have to make it workable for the planning staff and Eileen as the contractor. And so I'm happy to offer this amendment in order to make it as flexible as possible so that this can move forward. It's nothing I want to fall on my sword about. If we pass it, fine. If we don't, I'm fine with that too. But I'm trying to work with Eileen and planning and zoning to make this move forward.
Alderman, I'm not speaking in opposition. I just want clarity. And I know in your eagerness to move this forward, I don't want us to come back and say we shoulda, coulda, woulda, so I understand. Yeah, so, okay, so it's been moved in second, amendment number 4, which is to delete lines 28 and 29. It was moved and properly seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, thank you. Amendment 5, Alderman.
So Amendment 5 is on line 31, and the current language says establish subcommittees, and I want to be more directive there. So I want to substitute working committees included but not limited to committees on maritime zoning code, maritime industry, and community benefits. And I put in parentheses there, access to and safety on the water. For me, those are the 3 prime functions and focus areas of the task force. They're distinctly different. And I think we at least need subcommittees of that nature. The mayor has in mind still other subcommittees, and I think so do planning and zoning. So this language leaves the latitude. If there's a need for other working groups, so be it.
Okay, I see Mr. Lyles.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I didn't know what the difference between a subcommittee and a working committee is.
Well, I don't either. But that was the language suggested from planning and zoning.
Okay, 'cause I would suggest that standard language is always best in that it's customary, it's clear, it's well defined. If you change from standard language, we should define if there are any differences, and if there are no differences, then why use it?
That is, Mr. Lyles, thank you. That's fine with me. Basically, then the amendment would be on line 31. The task force may establish committees, including but not limited to committees on maritime zoning code, maritime industry, and maritime benefits. So we would just keep the word subcommittees and strike this working committees. I think it's the same thing. Again, I'm trying to work with planning and zoning and get them to a place where they can help staff this and move it forward. Subcommittees is fine with me. I appreciate that input from you.
So let me be clear. Line 31 would read, the task force may establish subcommittees including but not limited to committees on, and then the 3 items listed.
That is correct, Madam Chair.
Okay.
And I move
So
that. I move that amendment with that correction.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of recommending approval of Amendment 5, the Arnett amendments, please say aye.
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 Okay. Amendment 6.
Amendment 6 is on line 40, and the way the resolution is originally written, and I think Mr. Lyles will have some input on this, the City Council shall oversee and direct the task force. The proposed change, and this is again working with the Planning and Zoning Department, we would say we will drop that sentence and just say the City Council shall review any proposed amendments to the code. The intention is that the task force will work closely, as staffed by Planning and Zoning staff, will work closely with the Planning Commission and the City Council, primarily with the Rules Committee. One way or another, it'll come back to rules if there's any legislation proposed. But I think this is being sympathetic to direction or advice, counsel from the Office of Law. Also, remember the original intent was to establish this as a task force of the Rules Committee, and the Office of Law said, no, this really should be as a resolution and approved by the entire council. And so this is making clear that the council will be reviewing the outputs of the task force, and particularly as it relates to any kind of legislative changes. But that's the intent of this. And again, this is language worked out with the Planning and Zoning Department.
Okay, I do have a question for Mr. Lyles. Would this task force actually be proposing amendments? Does that not have to come out of the law department?
Proposing amendments for what?
To the code.
To the code.
They could propose amendments to the code. Anybody can propose amendment to the code. How it gets up to the council is through a process that we worked out. One is we help council people draft legislation, but these ideas and amendments can come from anywhere, but they go through council members to actually get facilitated through legal review and staff review.
Okay, so we would not be proposing the task force amendments. We would
well, basically what happens, the task force, as I understand the process, the task force will do a lot of research. They'll come back to you with recommendations, including recommendations for code changes. And it's on the council and its committees that are associated to then review those, get them where they need them to be, and then we can draft the language so that it meets your needs for eventual council review and vote.
Okay, so you're good with this new language. Okay.
Yeah, I'm good with it.
Okay, I see Dr. Nash.
Yes, I just wanted to confirm that and say we will, of course, work with the Office of Law closely, but this is just like the comprehensive plan where we get consensus on overall big picture policy ideas, and then the details like the ordinance or how other ways it's implemented is worked out subsequently.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And
all right.
Just to say, I feel, first of all, I really appreciate the efforts that are going to be required by Planning and Zoning staff. Ultimately, any of this is going to have to come back to the council, just like the comprehensive plan will have to come back to the council for final approval. So I'm very comfortable with this. I think Eileen has offered a correction, and I think it's consistent with counsel that I've received from Mr. Lyle as well, city attorney as well.
Okay. Further discussion on Amendment 6, which is to delete the first sentence on line 40 on page 3.
Correct.
Okay, hearing no further discussion and no hands up, I'm looking. All in favor of recommending favorable to amendment number 6, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, number 7, Alderman.
All right. So 7 and 8 are akin. 7 strikes basically starting on the bottom of page 3, this elaborate setting forth of task force goals and objectives. The notion here is, first of all, a lot of this is stuff that I would want to go in and amend piece by piece, but really, I think that the task force goals and objectives are pretty adequately laid out elsewhere. And in the interest of simplicity and flexibility, I would move that we strike section 9, which runs from the bottom of page 3 to line 46 on, I believe, line 46 to line 9 on page 5. So we would be going from 8, dropping 9, and the task force deliverables would be the new 9.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll second that.
So we're eliminating number 9, task force goals and objectives in total.
Correct.
Which would take us over to number 10, the task force deliverables is where it picks up.
Correct.
Okay. Further questions or discussion? Seeing no hands, all in favor of amendment number 7, please say aye.
Aye. The last amendment I would offer starts on page 5, and it is essentially eliminating section 11, which is the task force timeline and milestones. First of all, from the date that this was initially proposed, those timelines are wildly out of date. And again, in the interest of giving the task force the maximum amount of flexibility, I think that my objectives are covered once we get what the task force is, who they are, and what their deliverables are, which is in the current section 11. So rather than go in and do all kinds of amendments and work on deliverable dates, I think that's something we can just leave to the task force and as things develop. So the motion is to strike everything from line 36 on page 5 through line 12, I believe it is. Yeah, like line 12 on page 6.
So in other words, we're striking everything under number 11, task force timelines and milestones.
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Lyles.
Mr. Lyles has his hand up. I can't see him.
Yes, Madam Chair. Yep.
Yes, please.
I read over the legislation as drafted and amended, I do not see a date for a deliverable at all. And I wonder, without at least an end date for a deliverable, whether or not the task force has to do anything but think.
Well, the last line,
deliver.
The last line does say that their term expires in 1 year.
But doesn't say they have to do
anything. It doesn't say they have to do anything in that year.
No, they do have what is on page 5, number 10 now. There are task force deliverables elaborated A, B, and C.
Okay. So you're leaving D?
There is no D.
But you
page 5, number 10, the A, B, and C, which are the task force deliverables.
I thought we were eliminating this whole section 11.
No, it's a section 11 that we're eliminating. The timeline and milestones.
Right. So where would the deliverable date be if you take out all the timelines and milestones?
I'd be happy to put in dates if you can tell me what they are, but I don't think we know what they are at this point. Maybe Ms. Fogarty has a better sense of that. The milestones and deliverable dates I put in there were constructed in June, and they were optimistic for June, but not they're no longer viable, and I cannot predict.
Right. I'm just saying that let me make a suggestion that prior to September 30, 2021, the task force shall deliver its written recommendations to the city council.
And that would be what would substitute in section 11?
Could you say that again?
Yes. My suggestion would be, and this is inartfully said, but that the task force shall deliver to the city council on or before September 30 its list of recommendations.
On or before September 30 of
2021. That's the end date for the task force.
So that's too late for us to do anything with it, at least this council.
That would be in the new council.
Our last month we can introduce anything is June, so we really need their recommendations in I guess May.
Well, this task force expires on September 30, 2021. So why would the task force continue past the date of its recommendation?
What Alderman Savage is saying is if they have recommendations for legislative changes, given the current calendar, the latest that we can put in any legislative changes is June of 2021.
And I definitely understand and agree. My question becomes, what is the use of the task force after that date?
Well,
if they've given you all the recommendations.
I think that's a good question, but what you had offered is by December of 2021. I think Alderman Savage and I subscribe to this is that's too late. I think I would turn to Ms. Fogarty and say, I think we can certainly have information on all three of the deliverables and any others we want to add by June of this coming year, I would hope fervently. So, and we can always put a date certain, which we always tend to amend when we don't meet it. So, I mean, I would think, Alderman Savage, I would agree with you that the task force should deliver any recommendations to the council no later than the end of May 2021.
Yeah, well, and this, it also has to go to the Planning Commission and the Maritime Advisory Board. So that's another month of getting comments from them.
Ms. Fogarty?
I think what makes sense, so Alderman Savage is right. We will, throughout this process, be going to Rules and Planning Commission. What's realistic, I think, is to have some recommendations by then. The issue is if there is to be a report, something that is, a colored report with images and everything else, that takes more time. So I think as long as the language is something that it's recommendations, I think that would work. And I would do the recommendations by June, just because we'll be doing some things. We may not be doing everything given the tight timeline in a linear fashion. We may be doing some things simultaneously.
Well, let me ask Alderman Arnett, is the intent to have the changes to the code voted on by the current council?
That would be my druthers, but we're dealing with, as we know from every one of these bodies, we're dealing with what's possible. That's why I was willing to be much more flexible here. I like Alderman Savage's notion that recommendations from the task force must be delivered to the city council no later than the end of May. That may or may not be met, but that's a goal, basically. And that would assume that it's gone through its processes before the Planning Commission. That may or may not be met, but that we're basically establishing here a goal for deliverables from the task force. I know there are many out there that really want the task force to be delivering recommendations, particularly on maritime code, much before even May. But I think the city attorney is correct. We ought to put a date certain as a goal for the expectation of when we will be receiving recommendations. I understand Eileen's point. Recommendations are different than a report. I hadn't even envisioned a fancy bound report. If we get one of those, that's fine. We can leave it for posterity. I have about a foot of reports like that on my bookshelf right now. I'm more interested in action items that we can move forward in this council as legislation. So recommendations from the task force must be delivered no later than the end of May of 2021.
Let me ask, and maybe this is a question for Dr. Nash or Ms. Fogarty. Are all of the recommendations going to be amendments to the code, or could some of them be simply policy changes that might not need our process?
Yes, I imagine some of them would be policy, or even maybe recommendations for something to go to the capital improvement program. You know, there could be an assortment of different recommendations.
And things that would go into the comprehensive plan. I mean, that is part of this, is just to help that process as well.
Right.
So, I mean, my sense of what city attorney is saying is, let's put a specific date so that this doesn't meander on ad nauseum. I would turn to my colleague Alderman Savage and ask, is April better than May? I mean, I'm seeing.
Well, I'm kind of curious what Eileen, Ms. Fogarty is gonna. What's a feasible timetable? I mean, I'm hoping we can. I'm just to let you know, Ms. Fogarty. That is our hard deadline is June. Well, not hard deadline, but that's our target for the last date we can get legislation introduced, unless it's absolutely needed after that. But do you think, as the person who's going to be chairing this, do you think that's going to be doable, or is it something we need to extend out further?
So, Alderman Savage, the simple answer is, if everybody works together, if everybody comes to agreement, if we have a kumbaya early, absolutely. If we don't, we'll have to figure out how to bring forward. I'm okay with the end of May. I would not want to move it to April. What the goal here is to have a consensus among our residential community, Gesundheit, the industry and property owners, as well as those organizations that just represent the public good. And so we want to bring things forward that we have agreement on. The hope is we could bring it all forward, but what we should be able to do is certainly bring a good amount of it forward by the end of May.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Alderman.
I would suggest that we leave Amendment 8 as written, and that we do an Amendment number 9, which puts under the task force deliverables a section D, which says recommendations from the task force must be delivered no later than the end of May 2021. So that keeps it under the deliverables. It gets rid of the task force timeline and milestones. So it would be a new amendment number 9 that simply adds on to the task force deliverables.
And what would that read?
It would read after page 5, line 35, insert D, recommendations.
I got that. Tell me what it would say.
Recommendations from the task force must be delivered no later to whom? No later than the end of May 2021. Delivered to the council?
Yeah, and then we could refer it to the Planning Commission and the Maritime Advisory Board.
Right.
No later than
the end of May 2021.
Mr. Lyles and Ms. Eldridge is the one who's given us this calendar of when our legislation has to be completed in order to get us through this election cycle. But Mr. Lyles, would that speak to your concern about the deliverables?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, so what's on the floor now is amendment number 8. So
and I would ask that we vote favorably on amendment number 8 and then insert this new amendment number 9.
Okay, and amendment number 8 strikes all of the language relating to timeline and milestones.
That is correct.
Okay. So any further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and then new amendment number 9, which is to add a letter D under the task force deliverables.
Mm-hmm. Starting on page 5, line 35.
Right, that's where the deliverables are. Recommendation should be delivered to the council no later than the end of May 2021. Is that correct?
I had recommendations from the task force, but I think yours is more succinct. Ever the English teacher.
I just wrote down what you said. So, but okay, I'm adding from the task force. I just wrote it down as you were saying it. Okay, so is there a second for that motion amendment?
Yes, a second.
Okay, further discussion? None of our speakers have raised their hand recently, so I mean, but I guess not. Okay, all in favor of amendment number 9, please say aye.
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 Okay. So that does it for the Arnett amendments. Did we, Alderman Savage, your 2 amendments?
Yes, should be in Granicus and Legistar. So I guess that would make it amendment 10 and 11.
Or Savage amendments 1 and 2. The others are the Arnett amendments 1 through 9. I don't think it matters, but.
So my first amendment, again, it simply requires that the meetings are open to the public and that they should allow for public comments or written testimony. And again, my rationale with this is just, we had a lot of folks who wanted to get on this committee. And again, just emphasizing the point that you don't have to be on this committee as a member to have your voice heard. You just want to build in some kind of public process to it. And the first one would allow for that testimony, and the second one would simply require the task force to reach out to some of the other maritime property owners, business tenants in each of the districts, just to get their views on this. Because again, I know it sounded like there was some concern at our previous meeting about getting more representation from some of those groups. So in lieu of making this a gigantic task force, I thought it'd be good just to have the task force reach out to them. And I guess it'd be when it gets time, see what Ms. Fogarty, if you think that's a workable solution here, is just to have the task force do some outreach.
Yes, Alderman Savage, outreach, absolutely. And we will want to figure out ways to include all of those people in what we hear. That very much so. It's the intention right now to actually have public input when we go through the Planning Commission, meaning we'll be going to the Planning Commission and to the rules throughout the process. So let's say there are 5 or 6 meetings with the task force. There'll probably be at least 3 meetings. This is before you get into final action with both Planning Commission and rules. So there will be those will be structured in a way to have public input. So I guess my only comment would be, I agree with the public input. It may be in the amendment structured so that the meetings are open, but actual input may be taken at the commission or at the task force, because we're going to be structuring it both ways.
Okay. Yeah, for me, it doesn't necessarily matter how it happens. I just right. think it should, as long as it happens earlier on in the right. process, so it's not too late. Up to the committee, that's fine. Yeah,
throughout the process.
Okay.
So, Alderman, are you moving both of your amendments together, 1 and 2?
Yes. Thank you. I'll move amendments 1 and 2 as well.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay.
And
further discussion?
I strongly subscribe to both of them and thank Alderman Savage for those.
Okay. Hearing no further discussion, all in favor of the Savage amendments, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. I think that ends our amendments for R46. I'll entertain a motion to give a favorable recommendation for R46 as amended.
So move.
Second.
Okay. Further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye, 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 aye. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your indulgence. I think we've made this a much better product, and the collegiality with planning and zoning was very helpful in this process as well.
Okay, thank you. Going on to our next legislative item, O1020, zoning code applications, written notification requirement. And I'm looking, the only amendment is the gay amendment. Did we, how far
there are a few others posted now, looks like.
I don't have
one from me and one from, and 3 from Alderman Tierney.
Takia, I don't have those.
They're not attached to what was sent to us earlier.
Yeah, they're on Legistar.
Give me 1 second.
Could you send them to us, please, separately? While we're waiting, Ms. Fogarty and Mr. Lomax, they've already gone. I just wanted to thank them for coming today and sharing their positions with us, but I think they're already gone.
Should we start with Alderman Gay's amendment?
Yeah, he's not with us either, but we can. I'm looking now to see if I have something from him. It doesn't appear that I do.
I think this may have come from, I don't know if Mr. Lyles is still on here, but I think this one may have come from Mr. Lyles or Dr. Nash. It just removes abutting and puts in nearby. So just a word change there.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am, Madam Chair. That came from us. Just a clarification of the language.
Okay.
Isn't there a significant difference between abutting or adjoining versus nearby? I think of those as being touching the subject property from where the application is coming. Nearby is kind of a nebulous concept.
Well, we thought so as well, but abutting and nearby are two different things. And abutting means that the distance included made no sense, because if it's abutting, there is no distance because you're actually touching the property. So nearby plus a radius for communication.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, all right. That does make sense.
Okay, so one of you like to move the gay amendment, which is striking abutting and substituting it with nearby.
So move.
Second.
Okay, further discussion? And thank you for that clarification, Mr. Lyles. Okay, all in favor of the gay amendment, please say aye.
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 Do we have, I must say, Madam Chair, that I've gotten a surprising amount of reaction to this from across the board in response to my blast email about tonight's council meeting. Certainly Mr. Hyatt has been talking about this, but also Attorney Hollick has been talking, and I've been watching in the appeals for Eastport Lofts Landing. I can't remember which it is, but this whole notification issue has become extremely complicated. Office of Law can speak to this, I'm sure. And it is complicated because of tenants primarily, but also properties that have recently changed hands. So how do you know you're getting to the current tenant? And it's complicated with the current problem, the current distance, which is 200 feet. When you go to 750 feet, you're almost quadrupling the complications. And so I think it is late in the day to make amendments to this, but I do think that we need to have some either amendments to this, which means take more time, or new legislation that addresses this whole problem with how do you get to tenants. And it really came up at the hearing in that if you miss notifying anyone, have you been guilty of improper notification and your appeal should be thrown out? Now, there are secondary means of notification. One is the actual physical posting of the property, and the other is announcement in the Capitol of an impending action, and that may well be determined to be sufficient by the Office of Law. But there's no doubt that the effort required of an average citizen with no help of any sort to really comply with this notice requirement, even under the current distance, is onerous and unlikely to be perfect. And when we make the distance almost 4 times as great, and in terms of volume, much bigger number of potential address locations, and particularly any location that includes multi-tenant buildings like apartment buildings or condominiums, and especially those that are not available to the public. So you can't physically drop off a notice at each door. You have to somehow find a way to mail. So I guess my sense is this needs more work. I'm willing to go on and draft new legislation, or consider that we recommend postponing until legislation. That's less appealing to me, quite frankly, than drafting new legislation. But I put this before you because it has really been a thorny issue. It has been before the Board of Appeals 3 separate times in just this one current appeals case. So it is a very complicated and trying issue. And I would argue that the purpose of the Board of Appeals is to have a panel of peers, residents, hearing from other residents. And we are turning the Board of Appeals into something that is every bit as complicated as going before the circuit court, and virtually requires not only that the appellant have an attorney, but as Mr. Hyatt testified, he actually has a paralegal on his staff that works very much on just making sure that they get proper notice out. And there's no resident, no ordinary citizen that is going to have a paralegal to work on that. And one solution would be to switch the responsibility for the notice list from the appellant or applicant to the city with both GIS and up-to-date SStat data. I know, Sally, I'm getting you 10 more staff members. And I know that would be appealing to Mr. Hyatt because of the same notice requirements we have for the pre-application meeting that they must have for major projects before they put it in. And it takes the legal onus off of the back of either the applicant or the appellant and puts it on the city. The city currently has that onus when it comes to notification for community associations and other community organizations. So here we go.
Alderman Savage, I'll get back to you in a moment, but I saw Mr. Lyles' hand up, and I think he wanted to respond to something Alderman Arnett was saying.
Well, one, with respect to notice, the city in some of these cases is a party, and putting the onus of a party when other parties don't have the same requirement is unfair to the city as a party. Secondly, I think there needs to be some reflection on notice to tenants. Something I didn't want to push on initially, but it seems at one hand, the council wants to make things better for the average citizen. But when you add tenants, it actually makes it harder. I think taking tenants out and only property owners being notified is much better because it lessens the population that have to be notified, and it secures that the interest is one that has actual standing, because a tenant may or may not have standing to deal or debate with these issues for a host of different reasons. And we don't know all the time who a tenant might be, whereas a property owner is a property owner of record. It's easy to go to the court, find out who that individual is, and mail them something wherever they live in the world. Tenants can come 1 month and be gone the next month. So it's difficult to figure out whether or not they have true standing to come before the Board of Appeals and indicate whether they're in favor of something or not. So we think the property owner is the best person to be communicated to in the process. And I would recommend reviewing and revising this legislation to take the word tenant out from the communication.
Thank you. Alderman Savage.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to suggest, I think that maybe we focus on, I mean, I agree with a lot of your points, Alderman, but I think, we may very well, anybody here may make a motion to have this postponed and come back to the committee. But we do have a couple of amendments to discuss. I have one, and it looks like Alderman Tierney has three. I don't know if, Madam Chair, do you want to go through those first, and then we can get back to some of our own, if we want to develop new amendments from this committee, or if we're going to recommend postponement or something?
Well, I was going to ask Alderman Arnett, have you spoken with Alderman Gay about this legislation?
Not any time recently. Alderman Gay can...
He's on.
I don't remember, to be honest with you. But these are things that are of new vintage, as the city attorney said, and I kind of like the flavor of what Mr. Lyles is recommending. The tenants are the rub, and the real question is, tenants are impacted by developments nearby, but do they have a legal vested interest? And certainly their interest could be very different than the property owner, and in fact might be diametrically opposed. So I'm not really I'm certainly ready to consider what we do with tenants, but I'm really not ready to say we should drop tenants at this point. And to Alderman Savage's comment, yeah, I think this is a much bigger issue. I know I'm very guilty of it, but I think this tendency to postpone and postpone and postpone is probably not a good one. So I'm certainly open to the wisdom of the committee and the council about what to do about tenants.
Mr. Lyles?
Yes, with respect to tenants, we have to consider that a private residential property owner does not have to give you the names of any of the tenants. So the question becomes, how do you notify tenants that you don't know? Do you put something in every mailbox, which is illegal? Do you mail it to everybody as a resident, not a resident, but a occupant of a unit? And how do you know whether the individual occupant has received the document since it's not being addressed to any individual? So, and who's on the lease? Is it the occupant on the lease, or is it the relative of the occupant on the lease? So when you're in the tenancy category, there are a lot of other vagaries that come into the process with respect to actual notice that I think is that you're looking for, as opposed to property owners. It's clear because they're going to be listed in a deed and some court registry, and there won't be any dispute as to whether or not those individuals can be contacted through the information that's provided by the court. Just the last word on that.
Thank you, Mr. Lyles. I'm trying to pull up the amendments, the Savage amendments. Actually, no, I don't have them. Takia, Ms. Green, did you send us those amendments again?
I'm
Yes,
only aware
I
of
sent
the
them.
amendment to the ordinance.
Alderman Gay, there are some new ones.
Alderman Gay.
Well, how do you guys?
Have you been listening to Mr. Lyles and Alderman Arnett? Did you hear their comments, their concerns? Yes, no, maybe so.
I have, and I would have liked to have known the concerns before the day we're voting on it.
Okay, well, but they just explained them now, so we have to
Well, that's how
respond.
it typically goes with legislation. While the
We
process.
weren't aware.
How are you doing? This was.
We're not going to
shopped
be
around.
It's on.
okay. Do we want to, Alderman Gay? This is your opportunity to address the concerns of the committee and of the law department, so we can get this right. Okay.
In the future, may I just ask that, as it relates to my legislation, if there are any issues, please come to me before it is supposed to be on the floor. Thank you.
Okay, so we are talking about 010. This is your legislation. Mr. Lyles has shared his concerns about tenants and feels pretty strongly, I think, that the term tenant should be removed from the legislation because actually they don't have standing while the property owners do totally. So what's your, how do you respond to that? What's your feeling about that?
If he thinks it needs to be removed, then it can be removed. He is the city attorney.
So you would agree with his recommendation to remove it?
Yes.
Remove the term. So I'm going to need help finding the locations where it is, or should we just say, and Mr. Lyles, I guess this is for you, that we could strike the term tenants wherever it appears in the legislation?
Yes, it only appears a couple of times. We could do that because we're adjusting on the fly because we received many of these comments within the last hour or two, and we're trying amendments rather. So we're trying to get them all together for you. So you should get an email shortly here because Jacqueline is trying to get them all drafted and typed up for you.
Well, Madam Chair, we're kind of going a little out of order here because I have my amendment addresses in part, I think, what the city attorney is getting at. regarding the tenants.
That's on page 3, line 12.
I think we should deal with the amendments that we have on the floor, which are mine and Alderwoman Tierney's.
Well, and that's what we're waiting for. I don't have those amendments.
Yes, mine was a suggestion that was not a formal amendment yet. Hopefully you could consider it, but you know, in the list of things you have to do, it wasn't that dire.
So that amendment is not included in either the Savage or the Tierney amendments.
I haven't seen all the amendments. I'm going through them now, so I'm getting them on the email as we're in the meeting.
Okay. Alderman Savage, your amendments, are they something that you could describe simply without us having a written copy in front of us?
Yeah, I can brief you on what I'm trying to do. And to Alderman Gay's point, this is something that was brought up at the last Rules of Government, the issue I'm responding to. But some of the things that Alderman Arnett is voicing are things that we weren't aware of until things came up. Something came up with the appeal of a development project, and it revealed that there's a potential that this kind of makes it more difficult for appeals to go forward. We didn't know about that until recently, so we can't bring that forward to you until something that we know about these things. But in any case, that's my amendment focuses on, I think Dr. Nash, maybe it was Mr. Lyles, but somebody mentioned this last time because I was talking about allowing for applicants and developers to distribute notices essentially by hand, right? Leave them on the doorstep. I know they can't put them in the mailbox, but they can certainly leave them right at the residence in question, just to kind of eliminate some of the cost concern that they had about having to mail out to hundreds, if not many hundreds of residents nearby, especially if there's some apartment complex. So what I did here is just allow for, because I think Dr. Nash said that if we were to do that, it would have to change it, because right now it's required that they have to do it through the mail service. And so this would just allow them to do it by mail or a distribution of notice to the required recipients. And that's kind of how I worded it. And then I made a note that it had to be distributed within 7 days prior to the date of the hearing or the public meeting. So that's the only thing I was doing, is to try to have that be a viable option. And I say that, I think it's related to Mr. Lyles' comments in the sense that that kind of takes out the concern about if it's a tenant or property owner. It leaves them right at the actual physical address. I think it's easier for them because, I do that kind of thing with when I have town halls, is just leave these notices in person. With a few volunteers, it's definitely easy to do. But in terms of the tenants, I do kind of, I don't entirely, I do think it's important for the actual people who live there to get the notices, not just the property owners. But hopefully this might address that concern that Mr. Lyles had as well.
Okay. Alderman Gay, we did, I saw your hand up. We did approve your amendment, changing the language from abutting to nearby. I think you were not on when we took care of that.
Yeah, that was a recommendation from the commission.
Right. But you had your hand up separately and apart from that.
Yeah, I would agree with the city attorney on as it relates to changing property owner and tenant. That's on page 1, line 33, point B. Property owners and tenants of property located. It should probably just be property owners to not hold the tenant responsible. I would, after reading one of the requests, I'm not doing this to make it easy for the developer because I could care less if they had to kick out $100,000 to shoot letters to individuals within 750 feet. But they did note that the county's was 300 feet. So I would propose an amendment to reduce from 750 feet to not 300, but 400 feet.
That's a new
we're,
amendment.
we're discussing my proposed amendment at the moment.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought you were just explaining.
Well, you're explaining the amendments. You're proposing two amendments from what I'm hearing. One was the recommendation from the law department that
Yes.
we change terminology from tenants to property owners, or we strike tenants where it appears in the legislation.
Mhm.
And secondly, now that we amend the language to change from 750 feet to 350 or 400? What did you say?
400.
That's already addressed by Alderwoman Tierney's.
Well, we don't have Alderwoman Tierney, so
Yeah,
We do have, it's up on Legistar.
No, and I sent
I'm
them
looking
to
on
you.
Legistar. It's not here.
I'm on it. I have it
there.
open right now. Go on
excuse
the
me.
website.
I don't have the amendments in front of me. The law department has said they're coming. Okay, so, here we are. So right now, in the interim, the maker of this legislation has amendments he wants to make. If it's duplicated in another one, then that's another one we don't have to deal with. But we could take what he's proposing right now.
Well, we're
right.
all over the place. I've got an active amendment. Can I move my amendment so we can at least be done with that amendment and move forward to something else? I'd like to discuss Alderman Gays, but we have some on the floor I think we need to resolve.
I didn't realize you made the motion and that it was seconded, because I thought we were waiting for it to be in front of us. But if you're
still not, I can email it to you. Ms. Green, did you email that out?
I emailed those. I emailed Alderman Savage's and Alderwoman Tierney's. I emailed them when you guys first started, so it should be probably about 20 minutes ago now.
Yeah, I have them, but that doesn't mean that the chair has them. And I think it's pretty important that the chair have them.
Yeah, but
I think that's pretty important too. I do
you guys
see
are in the
the
same email.
Yeah. I see the Tierney amendments. I'm printing those out right now. Ms. Green, was the Savage amendment is separate?
Yes.
Okay, Alderman Savage, do you want to take your amendments?
Yeah, I'd like to move Amendment 2.
Second.
And so does everybody have that in front of them now?
I do.
Dr. Nash, do you recall this conversation we had? It's probably brief at the last.
About whether to mail it or if it could be distributed in another way.
Yeah, I think it was may have just been a quick aside comment of yours, but I think you just said that if I wanted to change this, then we would need to allow them to do that actual distribution in a different way besides mail.
Right. I think the city attorney might have had a thought on that. Didn't I see an email about that, Mr. Lyles, about it contradicted another part of the ordinance?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
About I believe you were saying in an email that it has to be mailed because there's no other way to prove that you've sent notice.
Yeah, that wasn't me. I don't know who said that, but
oh, okay.
It
Was
does
there any issue with distributing it like door to door by hand?
It does become an issue. I do not think that the Board of Appeals rules considers that necessarily. I think that mail is the reason that mail is good to use as a code device is because it's standard. Everyone knows what it is. It's not subject to interpretation. Delivery by hand could mean 9 different things. Whether you do it, someone else does it, whether they put it on the door in the mail slot, slipped in under a, so I think mail is a common term, a common device used because it's understood and it's standardized.
I see. Is there any other way to make it easier to?
Well, here's what's happening right now. In most of these situations with land use, that is why many jurisdictions also do posting, like a live sign, because the law at the state level really only requires notice. It does not require a lot of the particularities of notice that this council wants to put on notice, right? I've got a call, I got an email. No, notice. It is up to the person who is disputing notice to then have the burden to come into court and say, I didn't receive it, right? So what most jurisdictions do is they do the things that are least restrictive on all parties, but provides due notice. And signs is usually the best way because you can put a sign at the entrance of every development. If a person drives by it, is near it, they're going to see the signs. Additionally, mail to property owners gets at another level, and then website and email, Facebook gets at another level of people who might be interested in these things. If the person who complains that they didn't get notice at that point says they didn't get notice to a court, they've got a huge burden because the court's going to say, well, did you see the sign? Okay, you're a property owner. Did you get the mail? Well, if you're interested in this property, did you happen to look on the website about what's going on with the property? Because then a person who didn't go on the property, never saw the sign, never got a notice in the mail, the court's going to question whether or not they're actually interested in this thing enough to dispute it going up or being developed.
Well, if I just finish my my remarks here, I guess.
Alderman said, before you go on, Alderman Gay, did you have a response to City Attorney Lyles?
Yeah, I think that
went up while he was speaking.
Yeah, and I just quickly wanted to give the background, and I think it was kind of what you had laid out. The reason that this was introduced was because last year, prior to me even running, there was a situation where 45 townhomes were about to be developed in the backyard of constituents that are off of Colony Drive in Ward 6. They are just outside of the 200 feet limit, but they would have been severely impacted, and they had received no notification. The one sign that was posted for the public, if you don't go down Hilltop Lane, if you don't have to, I wouldn't see any reason why you would go just to see the sign. You didn't know that the sign was up. They were outside of the distance to receive the mail. So that's why I said, okay, well, then let's increase the distance so that they would at least have an opportunity to say that the property owner received a mail notification. I think that should be sufficient enough. Whatever my colleagues want to get into, that's with them, but I don't want to get into the Facebook and requirements and all of that because that's an extra burden on the developer, but that I think is unnecessary. That was the purpose of just extending this.
Alderman Savage.
Thank you. Yeah.
And then Alderman Arnett.
But again, my intention with this was one, to help, well, yes, I guess to lessen the burden, but also because I want to take out that argument that we're hearing from some groups that this is going to be too burdensome for them, too expensive, when my point was you could have a couple volunteers do this in a few hours and you're done. It's not a big burden. My concern with the tenants language, because again, I think there's a difference between the property owners and who actually lives there. You're talking about the tenants. If you live in a long-term rental, you're renting a house, if you're in an apartment, if you're in public housing, you might not be you're not necessarily on record as an owner, right? But we want them to get notified. So that's the question, is how do we make sure they're notified? And simply a mail is not necessarily going to hit everybody unless it is just going to the physical address and not the address of the property owner. Unless maybe there's a way, Mr. Attorney, to address that concern of mine. But I want to make sure, because I know Alderman Gay's, I think we have the same goal with this, and that's to make sure more people get notified and everybody gets notified who we think should. And so that's where we're kind of, we have the question now of because even without my amendment, which I'm okay if we don't want to pass it, but I think it could help give them another option. But even without that, we still have the question now if Alderman Gay is going to be introducing the whole language, or the proposed language about the tenant, taking the tenant out there, is everybody going to get notified? That's the bottom line question, I guess.
And I agree with what you're saying. It's just that if the question is asked of me about the propriety of a particular form of communication, I have got to say what is the limit of the city's responsibility. You can do more than the law requires always. You then have to balance politically whether in going to tenants, you're increasing the cost and labor for the average person, as is being complained about in one of our recent matters. But from the legal standpoint, I only care about the city being given the knowledge of what the law requires of you as a floor, and you can always do more. So I'm not really making an opinion about tenants versus tenants or tenants not tenants purely. I'm just saying that you don't have to do tenants if you decide that you just want to do the minimum that the law requires.
Okay.
Alderman Arnett, and then Alderman Gay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, there is legislative history here. And you probably remember it, Alderwoman Finlayson, but it used to be that it was required that notice be given in certified mail. And we changed that to just regular mail to lessen the burden. Certified mail is extremely expensive, but also not a perfect means either. If you don't get somebody to sign, is that they didn't get the notice or that they didn't want to sign. So I think there's that. In terms of your amendment specifically, Alderman Savage, I don't see in reading it how this gives an alternative other than mailing, because your first insertion comes on line 12 after the first of, but leaves in, if I'm reading it right, mailing of written notification. So if you wanted it to be more flexible than just mailing, shouldn't it be mailing or hand delivered? So that's confusing me on yours. Yeah.
Well, the way it's worded, it would say prior to any public meeting or public hearing on an application, the applicant must provide the planning and zoning director with verification of, and then it would insert verification of distribution of the notice to the required recipients or verification of the mailing of written verification. So it doesn't really say that it's hand delivered. It could be any method of distribution. Yeah.
Well, I bet the city attorney is having heartaches over that.
I'm turning my picture off now.
Yeah. I think the city attorney raises some very good points. First of all, we've always required that the property be posted. Now, maybe we think the sign should be bigger or something like that. I take Alderman Gay's point that if you don't have the opportunity to go into a neighborhood and see that sign, but you are behind that, and I remember that case very well, because the Planning Commission went a little bit overboard and was starting to put walkways in another community that wasn't even notified or related to the project. So expanding the ability of notice, but signage is one way. Publishing, we do publish this in the Capitol as well. So if people read the legal notice in the Capitol, I'm comfortable with mailing, but or some other alternative. But boy, having watched the Board of Appeals the last 3 times where notification has been a big issue, a very complicated issue with lots of aspects to it, like, do property owners, are they the only ones that have a position here, or are people who actually live there physically and could be living this day to day? As you had said, Alderman Savage, do they also need to be notified? I'm struck by the what the Board of Appeals seem to indicate, which is you need to demonstrate the good intent to make your notification as perfect as possible. It came up at the meeting, last hearing, that some properties had changed hands, so the notification went to a previous owner instead of the current owner. That happens, but I'm thinking of a poor resident who needs to, the day that they're putting together their mailing address, which, having done it personally myself, I can tell you is not a trivial process. If I have to go to SSTAT the day of and read that and re-amend my mailing list, that's a pretty tall burden and tall order for average citizens to appeal to a board that is supposed to be a board of their peers. So, I think we do have to find some way that we can achieve the goal, which is, to my mind, allow citizens to be heard by other citizens who are on this board, their reasons for appealing, and do that in a fairly straightforward before we get into all the formalities and legalities of going to circuit court. I think going before the Board of Appeals these days, I've been to circuit court, I'm having a hard time seeing the difference in the process. I mean, it is a little more relaxed, but not that much anymore. It has become quite legalistic, and lots of briefs being filed and all kinds of exhibits, and Exhibit G, that will label this Exhibit G, and so on and so forth, in order to build a record. So I think it's up to us as policymakers to try to find a comfort level there. But going back to Alderman Savage's amendment, I now understand the nature of it. I think it might want to be clearer, and I bet the city attorney is going to say we might need to be clearer about alternatives to mailing. Could be smoke signals.
Well, it may not be worth. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, I'm sure.
Mr. Lyles, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I just want to make clear that the Board of Appeals is not correct when it says that notice has to be perfect, because there is no perfect anything in the world of notice. What jurisdictions, and we're talking about the government's responsibility that the state law and the court through case law would put on the city, would be to do what is reasonable. And when it comes to requirements for the parties, to do what's least restrictive, right? So the city could be putting on parties an onerous burden that no one could live up to, which would defeat notice and an opportunity to be heard, right? If I can't give notice, am I being heard as a party? And so the city has to be very careful in balancing these decisions, because we can't make it perfect, because the parties would be so burdened that your Board of Appeals process is a nullity. The court would not see it as viable because you made it so burdensome to even be a party. So think of it. I would recommend just looking at all the different ways that notice is provided, and give yourself a pat on the back for, in the law, providing that 4 or 5 things serve as notice. And so that's good enough.
As a matter of clarification, the Board of Appeals, in fact, said notice didn't have to be perfect. It was the Office of Law who was asserting that it had to be perfect. And if there were 4 or a handful of people who didn't get notice, the appeal should be thrown out. So I think that was
that's not correct.
That was not the Office of Law. It was saying that you had to try, you had to demonstrate that you had tried, and that you had used the most recent list available to you that was reasonable, and that was not illustrated that night.
I would go back to what was submitted by Joel Braithwaite, and he was saying, throw it out because it's not perfect. There were 14,
I don't think that's what he was saying.
Well, there were 14 examples of people who did not get notice. And both Mr. Hyatt and Mr. Braithwaite were arguing that the appeal should be thrown out because of those deficiencies in notification. And you don't have to believe me. You can just go look at the tape.
Okay, well, we have a motion on the floor. Was it seconded?
Yes.
Okay, further discussion. Alderman Gay.
Yeah, I just had a quick question because I'm reading the notes from the Planning Commission, and also based off of my initial conversation with Director Nash, I wanted to make sure that, when we crafted this, that it would not affect the average person. That is why. So please, that is why we made it on major modification or major site design modifications or subdivision of plan and developments. I think that to say that we're making it, I don't know. I think that if the developer sent out a certain amount of letters to the the property owners nearby, the individual who is appealing should do the same. And I say that because traditionally the individuals who have appealed any projects for whatever reason have usually had the financial resources to do so. Usually have a specific intent on why they would like to see a project halted, regardless of what the community thinks. So why not put that individual or those individuals whom usually crowdsource or do whatever to cover the cost through the same circumstances? If you are appealing the project, I could see if we were making it tougher on residents to just put up a porch or something, but we're not touching that. We're making this for major site design modifications, so they should have to go through the same process. That's just my 2 cents on that.
Thank you, Alderman Gay. And further discussion on this?
Well, the question is how do we notify the prior to the meeting? How do we properly notify that notices were hand delivered as opposed to mailed?
Well, I was going to ask Dr. Nash what was her interpretation on the term verification. I assume that's what you're getting to. How is it going to be verified if we're supposed to be hand delivering, which I would not support either way. But how would you verify that?
Well, so 2 things. First, let me go back to what Alderman Gay was saying. I think the ordinance is a little confusing. We didn't intend it to be, but we meant to try and make it so people who are doing smaller applications like variances wouldn't have to do the additional radius. And that we did successfully. Where it gets confusing is the appeals, because if someone is appealing a plan development, then does that mean they do the 750 or does that mean they do the 200? I would agree that it would mean they would have to do the 750 and notify the same people who had been notified originally. But that is the case that we're talking about now with Eastport Lofts, where it has been difficult for the residents to meet the notification requirements regardless of their means, but mainly because of, they just don't do it a lot, and it's more complicated. It's complicated to do it for the first time. It's not rocket science. It's just that it takes some time, and you have to go through SDAT and get what you need and sort out this and that. So that is something we didn't think about in the ordinance, is the people who would be appealing these bigger kinds of projects.
I don't think that was a thought, really.
What'd you say?
I don't think that was a thought, at least not for me.
I didn't think about it, but it sounds like you're okay. I would say it would have to be the same, and same notification requirements for the appeal as to what the original application was. I think that's what you're saying too. I don't know if we need to clarify that in the ordinance or not, because it exempts appeals along with the other smaller projects. So that's why I'm saying it's confusing. And that's my fault. I didn't catch that earlier. For the hand delivered, I don't know exactly. I think we would need to ask Office of Law. For mailing, we require an affidavit. So I would think we could do something similar. Although we also get verification because, we'll get letters returned to us if, someone has moved or something, we'll get a letter kicked back to us. So that kind of helps us also verify that the letters were sent on time, whereas that wouldn't happen with hand delivered. But I think that's a question for Mr. Lyles.
Mr. Lyles, do you have an answer for?
Well, I think we talked about it before that, because the city is a party, we have to kind of adopt whatever is required. We would push back on having more of a requirement than any other party in many of these instances. Mm-hmm. Only because in some instances we are a party as opposed to the government. At the beginning stages when the decision is being made, requirements are that we follow and give notice and opportunity to be heard. But once we're a party, then we shouldn't have more burden than anyone else.
Okay. Yeah, Alderman Savage, sorry.
Yeah, this amendment may not, the juice might not be worth the squeeze at this point. I think it sounds like it may just make things a bit more difficult or unclear, I should say. I think I was trying to make it a bit easier, but there may not be too much of a demand for this anyway at the moment anyway. I was trying to respond to something I heard at the previous meeting, but and again, I think if we can resolve the question about including the tenants, then I think that would really resolve some of my concerns anyway. So, if it's the committee's desire, unless there's some strong support, you think we should move forward with this, I'm happy to withdraw this amendment.
I would think that would be, especially in light of the gay amendment that's coming that deals with the term tenants, that it would be appropriate to withdraw it. Alderman Arnett, you have an issue with that?
No, not at all.
Okay. So, Alderman Savage, are you withdrawing Amendment 2?
Yeah, I'll just withdraw the motion.
Okay. I think I'm a little confused with these amendment numbers. Traditionally, we have started from one with each person, but now we seem to be continuing. So instead of Tierney having 3 amendments, now there's 3 through 5, which are still 3 amendments, but the numbers are different. Alderman, Ms. Green?
For Alderman Savage's withdrawal, was that for both of his amendments or just?
It's only one.
I only had one.
Oh, okay.
But they're combined. Both issues are in the same amendment.
It's called Amendment 2. Savage.
Okay, got you. Never mind.
Yeah. Okay, I think we should take the gay amendment first, because we may have some duplication in the Tierney amendments that we can dispatch with. So, do we have the gay amendment written, or Alderman Gay, do you want to expound on your amendment, which was the city attorney's amendment?
Yeah, so the amendment would be to on lines. Sorry, I'm pulling up the actual legislation again.
From the notes I took, page 1, line 33, change the term tenant to property owners.
I believe that is the first one. Yes, yep.
Page 1, line 33?
Yeah.
That doesn't line
I'm sorry,
up.
page 2, line 33. Sorry. Property owner. It says property owners and tenants of property located within. So you'd be removing tenant. Correct, Mr. City Attorney?
Yes, sir.
And I'm not sure if there are any others.
I think someone said it was twice in the legislation. And
I only see it once. Just on page 2. I just did a search for it.
Oh, wow. I forgot about technology like that. Shift F. What is it? Shift F or something? Control F?
Control F.
Yeah.
okay, if that's the only place that it appears.
Yep, I think that's it.
Okay. So could I get a motion from the committee to support the gay amendment? The gay amendment 2. Gay amendment 1 is the one we've already approved, dealing with abutting and nearby.
Well, I'm a little concerned. Again, I'm still concerned about it, that we're going to be limiting the amount of people who get notified. I mean, don't you want the tenants to get notified, Alderman Gay?
I do want the tenants to get notified, but I don't want to go to the extreme that it makes it impossible for us to or us to be in close to the county. I am going much further than the county. They're at 300. I'd like to go to 4. So at least we are at least a little bit tougher than they are.
So you just want to be more in line with the county? Is that because we're often more strict than the county. I don't know if that's really a
what
we need to feel obligated to, but I just feel like we really need to make sure. I don't support it just because I want to make sure the tenants get notified. Now, if we take this out, I'm afraid there's going to be no requirement that they have to notify people who live in apartments or the renters or housing residents, anybody.
I thought that was why when we first got on, you guys were talking about the public comment that we received that requested that we remove it. And that's why I said, all right, well, then we can move it to 400 because it's not, too small of a shift, but I think it may be.
You're referring to the foot, the distance.
Yeah, which one?
I was just talking about the tenant, removing tenant, but in terms of the distance, that's another discussion too. I mean, if we need to compromise, then I guess pull back a little bit, but I still support your original 750.
Alderman Arnett.
No, I think we're confusing a couple of different issues here. First of all, the tenant notification here, as Dr. Nash indicated a few minutes ago, has to do with relatively small projects in their immediate neighborhood, and that still has just a 200-foot requirement. It's the big projects, except that this written notification requirement shall be 750 for planned developments and subdivisions that do not meet, so on and so forth. So I would argue striking tenants, I'm worried about striking tenants, period, but striking tenants there means that none of the nearby neighbors, if they're a tenant, a renter, will be notified for a porch modification or a garage addition or something like that. And I don't take that to be the meaning of Alderman Gay's legislation. I think in the bold, it is saying for these big projects, extend it for 750 feet. And to me, the logic behind that is big projects have a bigger impact. They're visible more broadly. They have more potential traffic impacts, parking impacts, all of those things. And that's why I am sympathetic to this legislation in its intent, albeit 400 feet or 750. I would quickly add, though, that the more If you went from 200 to 400, you're more than doubling the burden on notification because you're expanding an area. It's not a circumference or so forth. And when you go from 200 to 750, you're almost quadrupling the burden and the number of units that can fall in that area, that nearby area. I'd hate to confuse tenants and distance. I think they're two separable issues. And I still don't think we have a motion to be debating. And I'm not sure what the motion is. Is the motion that you're looking for one on tenants or one on distance?
Well, the alderman only presented one thus far, and I asked for a motion on this part that spoke to tenants. So that's what we're supposed to be talking about. Okay. So I would still entertain a motion as presented by Alderman Gay to change the term tenants to property owners.
I'm not comfortable offering that motion.
I'll move it because I think it'd be helpful to discuss it.
Okay, and I'll second it.
Okay.
Let me tell you how I feel about this. I think we're removing the burden or the responsibility from the property owners who have standing and who have the most interest, I guess, financially and otherwise. Tenants come and go, as Mr. Lyles has said. Sometimes tenants may not even agree. So whose responsibility, whose weight should this fall on? You know, I contend that it's the person who's paying the property taxes and who is working to keep people in his units, if it's a rental. The property owners are the ones that are accessible, not the tenants. And while it may be easy for you to have kids running around making notices, you don't have to do that with property owners. They may have an office or they have a general location where you can find them to address the issues. So, you know, I would think that the property owners have more standing and it should be their voice that is heard. And I understand that, you know, the more people you get involved in this, the murkier it can become. And I hope that's not the intent. But give the property owners the responsibility they should have. If they want their tenants or they want to hear how their tenants feel about it, they'll ask them. And if they don't, they won't. So, Alderman Savage.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to support this because, you know, I don't think rights should just convey with property owner rights. I think people who don't own property should have a voice. You know, we've had a long history in this country of only giving certain rights to property owners. In this case, I don't think we should do that at all. In any case, I don't think we should do that at all. Let's give everybody a voice, everybody a notice, and that's where it is. So that's why I don't currently support this amendment.
Alderman Gay.
And here's how I took it with removing tenant, that it would require, like I say, it was Eastport Terrace or Harbor House was within the area, require that letter to be sent out to that property manager or to that property owner. And so with that being said, could we then include an amendment requiring that the property owner send notification to the individual tenants? So that way we aren't putting the pressure on saying it to 1,000 plus tenants, but we are making sure that the property owner is responsible for relaying that message to their property or to their tenants. Can we do something like that? An amendment of that?
I think that would be a fitting amendment that would require the property owners to make notification of tenants of the property.
I'm scared.
Mr. Lyles, I see he's taking himself off the mic.
How do you verify that they've given that notice?
Well, the same way you verify the other notices. And if we're talking about the housing authority, it's very easy to verify.
Yeah, but what happens is the property owner then says, you're taxing me because I have to spend money that you didn't tell me I had to spend and it's an inappropriate levy, when I'm not a party to this thing, I don't even care about it. And my property tax is already high enough. So why are you making me spend money to notify folks? That would be an argument that might have salience in a court hearing as you try to hold the owner accountable for not providing these notices. Because you really have no police power to enforce that when there's not a connection to either a service going to that property owner or some general welfare issue that would make your police powers applicable in that way, right? So if you're going to say to a property owner, pay me money or do something, you've got to have two ways to get at that, either general welfare or we're providing you service, water, sewer, police, fire, what have you. And so you're paying me some portion to help with that service. Outside of that, it gets kind of difficult to assign to a property owner an act or something that costs money.
So to say that they may notify tenants?
You don't want to put may in a code, in legislation.
Okay. I knew you were going to say that. That's why I laughed. Alderman Gay.
Two quick questions. So then could we not require that they send out a physical mailing letter to their tenants, but just as they do with any, notification of a public meeting or anything, they just put it in a newsletter, a flyer? Could we do that? And if not, then could we
that probably is a little better. You're requiring the only issue I have with the requirement you're trying to put on the property owner is if the property owner has to spend 1 cent, it becomes an improper levy on their finances, right? And if you have somebody arguing, hey, I'm not a party to that thing over there. Why do I have to do anything? And why do I have to spend any money? If we knew it was free for them to do it, it may be a little better. But I can see anytime I have to put a piece of paper in an envelope and I have to have staff time to do it, it's costing me money if I'm a property owner. And it becomes a tax without justification.
Okay, so the motion that's on the floor now is still the motion that was moved to remove the term tenants and replace it with property owners. Is there further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
No.
Okay, so that motion was defeated. Alderman Gay, you had another amendment that would change the distance from 750 feet to 400 feet. And I don't think we ever delineated where that change would take place in the legislation.
Yeah, so it'd be on page 2, line 35 and line 44, where it says, except that this written notification requirement shall be 750 feet for planned development. And so as I mentioned, when I was hopped on the call, initially you guys were discussing the public comment that came in that pushed for the council to make an amendment to the side, to the distance. I did 750 feet because when I first came to Sally, I said, Sally, I want it to be 1,000. And she said, that's a little bit too much. So we, compromised and we got, at 750. I thought that was sufficient, but if I don't know, listen, I have to get it passed. So I want to be comfortable with something that makes my colleagues comfortable.
Did I hear you say that the county uses 350?
The county uses 300 according to public testimony we received. I'm not sure if that is accurate based off of the testimony.
Alderman Arnett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'm very much in sympathy with the intent of Alderman Gay's legislation. But Dewan, I would ask you, if we just do 400, which I'm sure would relieve a lot of people, would it have gotten to the people in Colony Hills? Would the notice have gotten to them? Because you're right, that was pretty egregious, and we need to protect them and people like that in the future.
So it would have gotten to the homes in Colony Hills, but the issue is, and I think maybe it was just the location of this particular signage or this particular piece of property. But because it would have affected so many people at so many different angles, it would have affected Colony Hills on the back. It would have affected Truxton on the side, Hilltop on the front. There were so many communities that missed out on this. If you were across the street on Hilltop, it would have definitely affected you with traffic turning out on the Hilltop, but you wouldn't have been notified because you were outside of the notification requirement. So I picked 750 after we, talked discussing about 1,000 being entirely too much, because it would have met the requirements where at least 3 times in my ward, if development takes place, this will happen over the next, 2 or 3 years. With this property here, which is the Pastrana property, the Royal Farms potential property that's on Forest, and then the property that's on Upper Forest, that would have been the childcare facility. All of those in some way, shape, or form would have been where the residents across the street, but who would have been directly impacted, would have not been notified. So that's, what was, put forward. 400 may meet the requirement, but I'm not sure if it would, get everybody, but it would do better than 200.
Further discussion? Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in general, I like your proposal, Alderman Gay, the 400 better than Alderwoman Tierney. I don't think it always makes sense to just match the county. We do a lot of things that are more strict, and we try to be leaders here, and that means we can't always simply be followers. But with the 400 feet, if we need to compromise that, I'm fine with it. At least it's better than what we have. But I do want to put it in perspective. 400 feet, that's not even the 16th of a mile. It's not even 1/8 of a mile. It's a small amount. So it's not a large distance. That's like a sprint around, part of a high school track. It's not even. So it's not a long distance. It's still not expanding as far as I think we should go, which is the 750. But, at least we're getting some forward movement.
Further discussion, Alderman Gay?
If, like I said, I just wanted to get passed so that we could have effective change for the constituents. I will go to bat with you for the 750.
Alderman Gay, the motion that's on the floor is from 750 to 400.
Well, I might remove the amendment if you can convince the other colleagues.
I would support 400. I would not support 750.
I want to hear what Mr. Lyles and Dr. Nash have to say.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Lyles.
I'm waiting for you, ma'am. Here's the thing. We have to be very careful about doing things arbitrarily. And to say, I want to go to 750 because I like the sound of it is probably going to be something that is a challengeable thing. If someone hears this colloquy now and goes to court and say, 750 is too much, it's unreasonable, The court's going to look to us to say, why is 750 reasonable, or why is 400 reasonable? What we cannot be bound to say in court under oath is, well, I compromise between 750 and 200. I think what would be helpful is looking at your experts, have your experts come before you and indicate why a certain distance makes sense, either because, as Alderman Gay opined, people coming out of a particular intersection are going to be affected. Makes that perfect sense, health and welfare. Or a bus line generally runs and turns a corner at every 750 feet, whatever it is. And so you then begin to capture distances based on something real as opposed to something not so real. And so I would just caution that as you talk about and think about distances, use your expertise that you have on staff to maybe indicate to you why a particular distance or radius or around a piece of property makes more sense from a notification versus another distance. Just a caution there.
Thank you. Dr. Nash, would you like to weigh in?
Yes, I would just say that there's not ever going to be an perfectly ideal way to do it. I think if we look at other jurisdictions, we see typically the range is between 200 and 300 feet. And the city is more dense than the county. So arguably our 200 feet is getting just as many people as the county's 300 feet. You know, that's just one way people get notification of a project. And I wanted to say one other thing that I have forgotten at this exact moment, but that's it for now.
I understand. Thank you. Well, let me speak. My decision was not an arbitrary one. Looking at the county's radius, which I believe probably is somewhere between 300 and maybe 350. We were at 200, and that was working relatively well, not perfectly. And I sympathize with Alderman Gay and why he is proposing this legislation, because there is a problem that needs to be fixed. But we are being excessive I think, in going to 750 without any reason for it. As Sally just said, we are a city. And a quarter of a mile is very different in the city than it is in the county. The number of people that are going to be reached is considerably different unless you're in one of the 3 urban areas in Anne Arundel County. And so, you know, we have to look at our radii very differently. So I would support going to 400. I would prefer going to 300. But if the maker is willing to do the 400, then I say we go for it, and we can always come back and address it if it's a problem. Further discussion? All right, then the motion on the.
I have some.
I'm
discussion.
sorry. Alderman Savage and then Alderman Gay.
Thank you.
Alderman Gay, I want you to have the last word. So.
Just a quick, because I did look at this, what was it, a year or 2 ago, Ross, when this issue came up with that lawsuit where the developers did challenge and overturn one of our laws. But in any case, I looked at Rockville, and just as an example, Rockville has 500 feet in general, but then they go to 750 feet for preliminary plan notification. So right there, we could go with something higher based on another jurisdiction.
Is it what's the area of urban density in Rockville compared to Annapolis?
Pretty urban.
I don't know.
Alderman Arnett.
Let me get rid of this phone call. I find I actually would prefer to address the problem that Alderman Gay correctly brings before us with more signage requirement rather than more distance. I do find some comfort in copying the county, as Dr. Nash sort of suggested. I don't think that's arbitrary. I think it is a big increase. It's a 50% increase in the notice requirement. It may actually have gotten notice to some of the people in Colony Hill. I don't think we're ever going to write legislation that is going to fit every single one of the circumstances that we're going to face. So I guess, and I would point out, we haven't taken up any of Alderwoman Tierney's proposed amendments, but I can live with 400. I think I could be happier with 300. I think that we are significantly increasing the notice burden. And that is a burden that doesn't just fall on the applicant or the appellant, it falls on our city staff too. So I would want to really make sure that we have a reason to become overextended or extend largely the notification area. So I guess I find some sympathy with Alderman Tierney's proposed 300 feet. I can live with 400. I certainly want to satisfy Alderman Gay and his need to make his constituents comfortable. They were very uncomfortable. I was at those hearings and they were hit out of the blue. I don't think anybody realized that the Planning Commission was going to go off on their foray and put these public spaces up to their property, but that happens. So I mean, I think that's where I am. I can support 400. I'd prefer 300.
Well, let me ask you, Alderman Gay, would you be willing to withdraw your motion for Alderwoman Tierney's fourth motion, which is to change it to 300?
I would not, because as Alderman Savage mentioned, I think so many times we are just too close to the county as it relates to anything. And I think additionally, I just pinpointed to 3 spaces that could have the potential to be significant development, whether it be residential or commercial, that with the existing, I think that maybe even at the 400 feet, residents will not be notified. In particularly, I'm really worried about the 2 which have the potential to be commercial developments on Forest Drive that would impact residential areas. And this is private property, public housing. So I think that, I wouldn't remove the amendment, but I think that at some point we should revisit this.
Okay, so the amendment on the floor is to change on page 2, lines 35 and 44, the distance from 750 to 400. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, please say aye.
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 The key is trying to get your attention, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, and I know what she's going to say. Ms. Green, tell us, how much time do we have? Because we're running out if we're not already over. Say that again, I'm sorry.
I wanted someone to state the amendment. But you just did.
I would say that I don't think we actually did state or get it seconded. The amendment is to modify page 2. Shall I stop?
No, go ahead.
Page 2, line 35, and page 2, line 44, strike 750 and substitute 400.
That is correct. And that's what we voted on.
Okay.
But you didn't get a motion or a second.
I thought Alderman, maybe we
Because
didn't.
Alderman Gay can't do it, so.
Right.
No, I didn't think it was Alderman Gay, but
Yeah.
okay, so let's go back. I need a motion to.
I just moved it. We need a second.
Okay,
It's been moved. You need a second.
Alderman
Second.
Savage?
Yeah, seconded.
Okay.
Now we can vote on it.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay. Thank you, Ms. Green. And we're going to work until 4:30 because we do have another meeting following this one. and we and the staff need a break.
So we're done?
I'm sorry?
Are we done with that individual piece of legislation?
No, we're going on to the Tierney amendments.
Oh.
Alderwoman Tierney has 3 amendments that she submitted. Does everyone have a copy of it?
Yes.
The first one is to strike property owner and substitute it for person or party. Page 2, lines 11 and 14. On page 2, line 12, subsection insert and section 21.10.040C. And on page 3, line 11, strike applicant and substitute person or party responsible. And on page 3, in line 13, strike an applicant and substitute the person or party responsible.
I'd like to move that we recommend favorably Amendment 3.
I'll second it for the sake of discussion, but I really would value some help from the city attorney. I think property owner has very specific meaning. I don't know what person or party. I don't even know what this changing applicant. That's line 13 on page 3.
It's just in the Board of Appeals section.
Mr. Lyles, can you help?
The applicant doesn't, it's the appellant.
Yeah, I don't understand those changes, and because if I read the section, just look at the last one, where you replace an applicant, page 3, line 13, the section says, prior to any public meeting or public hearing on an application, the applicant must provide certain things with verification of mailing. Now, why would you change applicant to person or party when what we're talking about is a site design plan application? So the applicant is the one that must do all these things, not a person or a party. We don't know what a person or party is because right now, this legislation, there isn't a dispute, right? No dispute. So there's no person, no party. The only person that's important is the applicant. So I don't know why you would change that.
Okay. Is the changing of the subsection appropriate, or is it just a numbering? That's page 2, line 12.
That brings in the Board of Appeals, referring to 21.10.040 is Board of Appeals procedures.
And so we're inserting 21.10.040C.
Yeah, and C says construction of section. As used in this section, the term appellant or includes petitioner or appellant as the case may be, and other provisions of this section shall be interpreted accordingly in consideration of the type of matter being heard. I just think this takes us so far afield of Alderman Gay can speak for himself, but so far afield from the purpose of the legislation, and I would really need a little more time or counsel from city attorney to understand exactly what these changes do. But my first inclination is to resist them, primarily because I don't know what they do and they don't seem appropriate, as the city attorney just said about changing the applicant to person or party responsible. We better have a new definition that defines what person or party responsible means.
You know, my concern is that this may be getting into the discussion we just had over tenants and property owners.
Well, and I think too, Madam Chair, what's going on is we're blending notice requirement for applications and what goes on in a Board of Appeals hearing, right? And the two are different. And I think, to Alderman Arnett's point, if we focus just on notice, then everything else that's coming in the way of an amendment right now is for something else, not this. And it's probably not this particular legislation that needs these modifications, or this code section that needs any modifications right now. And you really dealt with Alderman Gay's interest, which is distance for the notice purpose. Move off of that, and if Board of Appeals needs to be changed procedurally, then that needs a whole nother piece of legislation, I think.
Alderman Gay, do you have a response to this amendment?
I am in total agreement with what the city attorney has said.
Okay. Further discussion? There's a motion on the floor to support Amendment 3. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor of supporting Amendment 3 of the Tierney amendments, please say aye. Opposed? Aye.
Nay.
Oh.
Okay, so we opposed Amendment 3. Amendment 4 is to strike tenants and strike 200 and substitute 300. And on page 2, line 33. And in light 34, strike language beginning with except down through applicants in line 38.
I'll move this amendment.
Second.
Okay, Alderman Savage, and then Alderman Arnett, and then Alderman Gay.
Okay, yeah. So it looks like what this does is it strikes all of the new language and just changes it to a flat 300 feet, no matter what type of application. And this certainly, while 300 is certainly an improvement over the original 200, I'd still support the original intention of the primary sponsor, and that's why I signed on to it. So I'm not in favor of this currently, but I'd like to hear from the primary sponsor at some point as well.
Alderman Arnett.
So I believe on this amendment, we've already dealt with striking tenant, and the answer was no. We've already dealt with the distance, which is 400 feet, not 300 feet. So the only remaining issue is, does the 400 feet apply to everything? In which case, is this extra language except that this written notification requirement shall be for 400 feet for the planned developments? I don't think that is any longer an except. So I do agree with Alderwoman Tierney that can be struck. But again, I want to be sensitive to Alderman Gay. This is his legislation. I don't think it's an except anymore, but if he wants to leave in this written notification shall be 400 feet for planned developments and subdivisions, that's fine with me. I think it's redundant, but it's fine with me.
What did you think was redundant?
Well, I think that now we're making everybody have to do within 400 feet, no matter what the application is for. So it would include, right now, the way you had written it originally, there was a difference between the small projects going back up to line 33, which it stayed at 200 feet. And then the big projects were the ones that had the bigger 750 requirement.
Yeah.
Now I think we're making everything 400 feet, if I understand.
Yeah, and I would be opposed to that.
Okay. So
I'm not sure I read it that way. Dr. Nash, are you reading it that way? Are you talking about with the amendment? It would. Are you talking about the amendment, Ross? I mean, Mr. Arnett.
Yes. Yeah. The amendment. I'm opposed to this amendment, but.
Okay. The third part of the amendment would make it generic across the board, everybody, if we took out that language. Okay.
Right. Yeah. So right now, Alderman Gay's language has still for the smaller projects, 200 feet, for the big
Right.
projects, 400. I'm in
Yes.
sympathy with that. So
Okay.
I would reject Alderwoman Tierney's amendments for those reasons.
Alderman Gay, are you good?
I'm in agreement with that as well.
Okay. Further discussion? Did we have a motion? Yes, we did. So the motion on the floor is to approve Amendment 4 of the Tierney amendments. All in favor, please say aye. All opposed? Nay.
Nay.
No.
Okay, so we oppose that amendment. And the last amendment is Amendment 5, page 2, line 43, strike 200 and substitute 300. And also in line 43, strike language beginning with except down through applications on page 3 and line 1.
So I'll move the Tierney amendment number 5
Second.
and vote no.
Okay. Any discussion? I know it's duplicating what we just did, kind of. I don't see any new language. Am I missing something?
No, I think it's just speaking to section D as opposed to section B.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's the same logic.
Okay. Further discussion? Alderman Gay?
I have none.
Okay. So the motion on the floor is to give a favorable recommendation for Amendment 5 of the Tierney amendments. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Okay. So that leaves us with 01020 as amended. I'll entertain a motion to give a favorable recommendation for 01020 as amended.
So move.
Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Are we interested in starting 027?
That was some good teamwork.
Thank you for joining
Thank you,
us.
Alderman.
Yeah,
Thank you, guys. See you guys.
02720 is on the city council agenda for tonight. I believe I'm comfortable with all of the amendments that were proposed by the administration and with the legislation. Alderwoman Finlayson, I believe this is the administration putting into code finally what you and I recommended over a decade ago. And I want to thank Trish Hopkins for that. And I have gotten some pushback on this, and I took it to heart, but I think this legislation does what we wanted to do, which is saying that if you're going to hire staff, you can do it for a while without adhering to civil service rules. But if you're going to be doing it for any length of time, you really need to follow the civil service rules for hiring and notifying and all the other processes.
Alderman, I think you're absolutely right. As part of our discussions many years ago about moving these folks into permanent positions, they're pretty much in permanent jobs. If we keep people in contract positions for 5, 10, 15 years, surely they're jobs that are needed. And we've been really not treating them fairly by keeping them on as contract employees when we know that we need them and what they're doing. So, yes, and I see Trish, Ms. Hopkins is on with us. Would you like to
Can I make a motion first, just to
yes.
make the
Alderman.
move we recommend favorably?
Second? I thought I had, but
Did we approve any of the amendments? Because there are 10.
Yeah, and actually there's a correction that we're going to make to Amendment 6.
I can't get the amendments up, so I just have the red line version.
Okay, there are 10 Buckley amendments.
And I'm getting the infamous error 410. Pull those up.
Brian fixed mine Saturday. You're going to have to give it to him. Tricia, can you walk us through these amendments? And then
I believe I can. We did make a change. There was a request to know going forward, what kind of expenses may be for the city for the conversion. And so I know that Jody prepared something to show the pension costs associated with that down the road. Obviously, the way this is worded is to ensure that in the future, we are recognizing the impact of COVID on us financially, so that although years ago your intent was within 2 years, if we've had a position there for a while, that we should be really looking at affording the conversion of that position to either the exempt service or the civil service. Well, we kind of stretched that out a bit to 5 years, not knowing how long it's going to take us to recover from the impact of this, our current economic reality. And so, it's really quite a projection down the road. So it's not current. It's certainly not going to be in this fiscal year or even in the next fiscal year that we're looking at that. So with the Buckley amendments, we mostly tried to clarify things definitionally so that we're getting a better understanding of what excluded service is, which is the category in the exempt service that this appears in the code in Title III. And so we're really talking about employment agreements, which is our renaming of contractual employment. There sometimes gets to be some confusion between independent contractual agreements, which are non-employee type agreements with individuals that we don't control their workspace and their work, that we don't assign them the work. They fulfill a function for us and are under independent contractor agreements. And so now we call them employment agreements. And so this part of that is really making that distinction under the law. And then we've added a definition of employment agreement in there. So one of the amendments is under employee, which is already there. There's a definition for employment agreement to clarify it's a written agreement. And then we talk about employment agreement it could be for either a part-time or a full-time employee, but that we make distinctions about that. In the city, we generally try to make sure that those that we have employment agreements for are those that are eligible for and receive city health insurance and leave benefits, holiday benefits. And so under the Affordable Care Act, that definitionally is at 30 hours or more, we are expected to offer medical benefits to. And so we like to have employment agreements for those folks who are offered medical benefits so that it's clear to them that we are extending it. It gives us an opportunity to follow the law in terms of, is there a waiver necessary? If they don't want the insurance, we have to show under the Affordable Care Act, in order to comply with the requirements of that law, that we did in fact offer it, even if somebody didn't take it. So they may not necessarily have medical, but they had the opportunity to have it and therefore can waive it. So I'm making that point only because, and when you get into costing, you may not have the expense because the person didn't choose it, but you may in the future have that expense if the person then does in fact choose it. So then we also have to clarify what is the definition of a temporary employee later on in that. So part of the amendment just makes that known as well.
May I stop you here? Can we? Yeah. And I'll ask the committee, can we take amendments 1 through, Ms. Hopkins, you said you had some changes to 6?
6. So what we ran into when we were, when Jody and I were looking into responding to Alderman Savage's request, is that I don't know how that was, but we also have a definition of under 30 hours as not requiring an employment agreement. And for some reason that was stricken. So we have asked to put that, I have asked to put that back in, because we clearly have situations where we have employees that are providing supplemental services. So the way temporary employment was written, it kind of, it's like you're only in that category if you're within the 106 days. Now, the 106 days, just for everyone's edification, that's kind of like Memorial Day to Labor Day. And so it's your summer employment. So summer employment people under various phases of law, the ACA included, and the state's requirement for us to have what they have referred to as sick and safe leave available to individuals, have paid time off for people who work beyond 106 days. We certainly provide that benefit to people, but we had the anomaly of covering individuals under an employment agreement who work sporadically. For example, in planning and zoning, there are 2 inspectors that work on an as-needed basis. Well, they could work well past 106 days or not, but they're, since it's not 106 continuous days, it would have put us in a very weird position of having an employment agreement and converting them later on. When clearly we're really just having to have them on an on-call basis, on an as-need basis, and need to do so. So I asked Mike Lyles this morning if we could just put that back, and he said, just make a formal request for it, and have done so. So that is why we are adjusting Amendment 6. We're literally lifting the language that was there that said on line 30, after the line that says,
what
who
page?
Works either.
What page?
I'm sorry, page 3. Line 30, at least the red line version I have, it's on line 30. We are putting back, we are no longer striking the language that says for less than 30 regularly scheduled hours per week.
The copy I'm looking at is on line 23 through 27. There's no strike throughs.
Are you looking at the red line version?
I am not. I have in one hand Alderwoman Tierney's amendments only.
Okay.
I mean, Mayor Buckley, and then the other I have the legislation.
So Alderwoman Finlayson, what I'm looking at is the red line version, because it's so much easier to follow where the amendments land. It's just more readable.
And I'm looking at it. I see it. I'm just looking for the change, trying to figure out which one of these two has the change.
So I don't
did
know.
Did you put back in the 30 regularly scheduled hours?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, that's exactly what we did.
Okay.
And that's all we did. That's the only change that was made. Again, I think from an affordability standpoint and really from intent, it should be there. We have employees that work all different kinds of hours. It's really a workforce that doesn't lend itself to just simply that 106 continuous day restriction.
Okay.
And we absolutely follow the law. So if those individuals are working 30 or more hours, they're under an agreement, clearly. If they're working less than that, we have to make sure that they're consistently staying under that kind of threshold. So we're not failing to follow federal law and making sure those individuals are in fact entitled to have medical insurance. And again, there's also a threshold under the sick and safe leave that the state expects of us, that if you work 12 hours weekly or 24 hours biweekly, you're not eligible for that leave. We have employees that are in that category as well. So to be outside of this little block of time, this kind of summer employment concept, it just didn't really it didn't make sense. And it would be really difficult to convert that type of employee as well. And we weren't yet also prepared to have part-time civil service employees. The city doesn't really have people who are, with some exception, and almost all exception, part-time workers that receive the benefits and have just a standard set of hours continuously that you could say this person, like my experience at county government was, okay, we've decided this person's going to work 75% of full time. And so then the way we're going to provide their benefits is we're going to give them 75% of the leave benefit. We're going to convert their holidays to annual leave time so we can convert that as well. We're going to make you pay more for your health insurance premium, which they typically do. And we're just not set up that way. It doesn't mean we couldn't be. It's just that we aren't, and neither are our part-time employees really functioning in that manner either. So better to get that all squared away and not enter into conversion of anything other than full-time employees who have been, a mainstay and expected to be here and otherwise compensated. And then clearly under the definitions as well, this is not connected with amendments, is that if we have positions that are temporarily here because of a grant that we got, that they are funded by a term limited grant. And even it might be a grant that we've had for 5 years and expect to have for a few more. It still is not a forever arrangement that you would want to be in a situation where you now have a permanent merit system, civil service level job that you now have to pay out a general fund because of that commitment. We do know that, we have on that list, Alderman Savage, we have individuals that are interns or, we would expect aren't going to come to that 5-year threshold because we've made temporary arrangements for those. There's some that are like COVID CARES money funded, and we know, all things going well, it's not going to be a 5-year experience here. That
and Tricia, are you talking about the list I provided today?
A little bit. Yep.
Okay, because you had given me one that had one intern, and we have more than that. I took the intern off for my purposes today.
Yeah, and so that by explanation that would not be included. Those are positions that are fulfilling of a very particular need right now, and we'll never get to our 5-year threshold. So to forecast that we have conversion costs with that wouldn't be appropriate.
Alderman Arnett and then Alderman Savage.
So the pushback that I got was that this was bringing on additional costs to the city at a time when we know from our Saturday budget retreat, we're facing some difficulties. I added up the amount from the table that we received from Director Dickinson, and it does add $118,000 across the city, $92,000 in the general fund, and then smaller amounts, 11 and 14, and 2 of the other funds. My argument is that the overall principle is that we really want to hire according to the principles of the civil service. This gives departments 5 years of flexibility for existing circumstances and any future. So next year, if somebody wants to bring on a contract employee for some reason, they would have up to 5 years to either let them go or convert them, as is seen. But the fiscal cost of this is something that would have to be reflected in the budget, and the council, as a part of the budget process, has every right to question an increase in the budget of $118,000. Can we afford it? And my suspicion is if this were to be where we can't afford it, that department heads would make their decision about where they make their reductions in their force. And it could be that they don't convert contract employees. It could be that they convert and let some other employee go, but that's a department head decision to make. The overall principle here is we really want people to be hired through civil service processes, which have open notification, have KSAs and other standards by which people are reviewed for their qualifications to be employed, and that they're given all of the rights that fair labor standards would require, that and other laws, which Tricia has just outlined for us, some of them.
First, I would like to say, Alderman Arnett, not to interrupt you, but just to make a point here. Most positions that we fill, almost every one of them, we do post them. We do put the credentials out there that we're seeking, including these positions that are on this list. There are a number of them that individuals did go through a selection process in order to get. There are exceptions where that has not occurred, but in most cases, departments have been very good about going through a recruitment process in order to make their selection.
Before your tenure here, there was one notable abuse in the Department of Transportation, and other people have been hired under contract without HRs knowing it, and that is a possibility now. The overall principle that was established, not put in code, however, was that by and large, for long-term employment arrangements, we want them to be civil service employees and have all of the process, rights, and benefits of civil service employment. And yes, that does cost more.
Yeah. And some positions also to add to this, so we're just fully disclosing, is some positions would convert to exempt service by nature of where they're located. You know, if they're in the mayor's office, those would be exempt service positions. And we would have to address them legislatively as well. They would need to make their appearance in the exempt service section of Article 3. So we would do that as well.
Alderman Savage.
Well, thank you. And first of all, thank you, Ms. Dickinson and Ms. Hopkins, for the information on the fiscal impact. It's helpful to see. I'm glad it wasn't as large as I was fearing, but it's still, obviously a substantial amount. But I guess the one question on that information, how many of these folks get, how many of these positions get health insurance, and would that be a substantial cost increase if they don't?
Again, just to reiterate, if we provide medical benefits to individuals, they are under a contractual agreement. They are under an employment agreement. Okay. So we would not have anybody that's not on this list who receives medical benefits fail to be under an agreement.
Okay. So even if they're under 30 hours or a week or whatever that is, 1,500 hours a year, they would still have an employment agreement.
We don't use 1,500 hours. That's actually a county legal provision. What we use is 30 hours or more per week, or if they have been provided employment benefits because of working, when they're scheduled to work, they are working 30 hours or more.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jody.
I just was going to clarify, are we saying that if they are working over the 28 or 30 hours a week, do we offer them health benefits? Many of these don't, because they opt out, because they have coverage elsewhere. But I was just wondering, to ask the question, putting it the other way, on these people that we have listed, have we offered them all?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. We comply with the Federal Affordable Care Act. Okay. And when we provide them there's an addendum to agreements that give them the opportunity to indicate that they waive. Either they're choosing or they're waiving.
Okay. Well, I think for me, as you know, I've been a bit concerned, but I think Alderman Arnett really said something that has shifted, caused me to shift my position, which is basically that I think the fact that even if this passes, and so even if all these positions after 5 years, we have to make that tough decision whether or not to hire them as civil servants or let them go. But the point is, at that time, that's still going to have to come back to council for discussion. And so we'll still need to hear from the departments about if there's still that need or whatnot, and where they may need to make up the cost. And so that at least gives me assurances that we're not signing away, on this huge expense right now. We're just saying that, and I think it could be good. It'll force, I think, more of a discussion about if we actually need these positions or if we do need to convert them. So I think this will help encourage more transparency also.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
But it was just the way it was framed. I just wasn't thinking about that before. But thank you.
And it necessarily has to come back to my office, for that kind of review, for the kind of determination of what the job description looks like. We have a civil service review process for the Civil Service Board, so that job description that has to go through that body. If it's a civil service job, if it's exempt service, that's the HR manager and the city manager. And then, it has to be listed in the law, that title's got to be there. And then that is before you necessarily as part of an ordinance changing what the city code lists. So there are mechanisms in place to handle that necessarily elevated to the appropriate review level.
Okay. So I'm ready to vote, Madam Chair.
Further discussion?
Just one question. Are we going to insert the withdrawal of the strikeout in Mayor's Amendment number 6, which is on page 3, line something? Do you want us to do that here, or will we just do that tonight at the council meeting?
I believe it's already been loaded, that Jacqueline took care of that, and it's already up on Granicus.
Okay.
So it will be there for you this evening.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the corrected Amendment 6 will be there.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay.
It should already be loaded into Granicus based on the email I got from Jacqueline before this meeting.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions for Trish about the mayor's 10 amendments?
I move we recommend favorably on the mayor's 10 amendments and on 02720 as amended.
Well, can we take one at a time?
I was trying to hurry.
I know, but we got to do it right because it's going to make it.
All right. I move we recommend favorably on the mayor's 10 amendments.
Can I get a
second?
Okay. Further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of amendments 1 through 10, please say aye.
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 Now I move that we recommend favorably.
Did we freeze up? Okay.
Yeah.
We're all out of sync, I think.
Yeah.
I move we recommend favorably 027 as amended.
Second.
Okay. Further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay. That was 027. Thank you. And last item is 03720. Is that on tonight's agenda also?
I think so. Well, I don't know. Yeah.
I don't think this one's on there. Oh, no, it is. Yep. Oh, yeah. This is the
government statement. And I'm looking, there are no amendments that I see. Are there amendments?
No.
I'm not seeing any amendments to this.
So is Trish still with us? I mean, this looks like it's pretty much a technical
Well, this is
change.
coming from the mayor and I. 3720. Madam Chair, you want me to just give a brief?
Yes.
So this.
Yes, please.
Yeah, this is came up because some of the some of the boards and commissions, and given the current language, some of the boards and commissions were subject to the annual performance standard requirement. And so what this does is just clarify that the performance statements are for each agency and department, and that it says, for the purpose of this, on page 2, line 1, for the purposes of this chapter, boards, commissions, and committees are not agencies of the city, which essentially exempts them from this particular requirement, which I think wasn't necessarily intended for them.
I recommend that we move favorably on 03720.
Second.
Okay, Alderman, let me ask. In page 2, line 1 and 2, for the purposes of this charter, boards, commissions, and committees are not agencies of the city. That's the new language, correct? And exactly what does that mean legally? Because this Education Commission always talks about being an agency of the city. Mr. Lyles' hand is up. Mr. Lyles.
Yes, ma'am. This just means for this section only, they don't have to submit performance standards annually.
Okay.
In other words, all of the other commissions are agents of the city, but not for the purposes of submitting an annual performance statement to the city council. They found it too burdensome, and we found the language confusing as to who was supposed to actually submit these annual reviews. And it is as the city managers worked it out, it's a complex series of documents and dashboards that have to be completed and filled out, and volunteers found it a little onerous. So they're just taking them out of that, only for the agencies and departments.
This has nothing to do with their annual reports, for lack of a better description, that they give us.
Nothing.
Okay. All right. Here's any further discussion? It's been properly moved and seconded. All in favor of giving a favorable recommendation to 03720, please say aye.
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 Aye. Okay.
Madam Chair, for the good of the order, I move that the three of us be excused from the council member tonight.
I will second that. Yes.
A lot of good work done. Thank you,
can you
colleagues.
make that happen for us? We'd include you in it. Well, since we probably can't do that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? Seeing nothing, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank
Thank you, staff.
Yeah. Good job, everyone.
Yeah.